In other news from Jamaica, Finance Minister Audley Shaw brought the curtains of the debate of the 2016-2017 estimates of expenditure to a close on Wednesday, but not before he clarified what he noted are inaccuracies in the flaws identified in the budget by the opposition. The first point he brought to the floor was the debt-to-GDP ratio, which the opposition spokesman on finance, Dr. Peter Phillips, had said would remain flat. Mr. Shaw says he agrees with that prediction. However, he notes that before one makes disingenuous remarks drawing bogus conclusions, one needs to understand what is behind the figures.
Three critical factors have contributed to this flat profile of the debt-to-GDP ratio as follows. One, some budget support funding, somewhere between US $100 million to US $150 million, that was expected from multilaterals in 2015-16. I think $100 million US of that was the Inter-American Development Bank. Did not, in fact, materialize and are now therefore programmed in 2016-17. Had those inflows materialized as expected, then the debt stock and the debt to GDP would have been higher in 2015-16, and the debt trajectory would have shown a reduction in 2016-17. A portion of the planned borrowing for 2016-17 is for, and this is the second point, is for pre-funding, Mr. Speaker, pre-funding of maturities that are due in May and June of 2017. The opposition spokesman knows that it is prudent fiscal planning to secure resources ahead of time when, or ahead of when the obligation becomes due.
The third point the minister makes was an explanation of why the fiscal deficit is expected to increase from 3.3% to 1% of GDP in the financial year 2016-2017.
The most significant contributor to the increase being higher external interest costs, due in large part to the takeout of low-cost Petrocarib debt with high-cost borrowing on the global financial market, moving from 1% at Petrocarib and to 7% on the international capital market. That is the main reason for the increase in the fiscal deficit. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the opposition spokesman on finance boasts that the debt-to-GDP ratio has fallen from well over 140% in 2011 to current levels of 126.8%. Well, Mr. Speaker, the fiscal policy paper dated 18th April 2013 has debt to GDP for fiscal 2011-12 at 131.5%, not well over 140%. The spokesman on finance would have us believe, as he would have us believe.
And Mr. Shaw also took issue with the opposition spokesman on finance's classification of the budget as smaller in real terms. In his presentation last week, Dr. Phillips said, though the budget is nominal in nominal terms, is 7.3% more than the expenditure last year, when the projected inflation of 5% is applied, the result will be less resources in real terms to provide these sources needed by the people. In response, Minister Shaw asked the opposition spokesman to redo the math.
I have to clarify that actually, if there is a nominal increase of 7.3% and projected inflation of 5%, then recurrent expenditure would be larger in real terms by 2.3%. Check your math again, Mr. Opposition Spokesman on Finance. Mr. Speaker, as indicated in the fiscal policy paper, the recurrent programs are budgeted to increase by approximately 5%, broadly in line with inflation and hence no reduction in real terms. The capital budget, which includes developing the country's infrastructure, are budgeted to increase by over 31%. In terms of, we acknowledge, yes, that the primary balance having been reduced has left some additional fiscal space to allow for additional capital spending. So this is budgeted to increase by 31%. In terms of providing the services, both recurrent and capital, needed by the people, the budget overall, therefore, has been increased by 10%. That's a real increase of about 5% when inflation, Mr. Speaker, is taken into consideration. Rather than a real decrease, as incorrectly calculated by the spokesman, it is a real increase.
And the Finance Minister also took his opposition counterpart to task about his comments on taxation projections. Dr. Phillips had noted that the projection in revenues are overstated, citing that the anticipated tax revenue of $445.5 billion is 8.2% higher than the outturn in 2015-2016. But Minister Shaw says his facts are skewed.
What are the facts? Let's clear it up. Tax revenue in 2015-16 increased by approximately $41 billion, or 11% over the previous fiscal year. This occurred within a context of record low inflation and low economic growth. Thus, the projected increase for 16-17 of $33.6 billion is $8 billion, or 1.7 percentage points less than what obtained in the previous fiscal year. Why is that so unrealistic? Even with expectations of higher inflation and real economic growth that we have projected at some 1.8%. This is quite conservative, we believe, Mr. Speaker. Over the last 4 years, Mr. Speaker, tax revenue increased. And listen now, we can go by average. Over the last 4 years, tax revenue increased at an annual average of 9.2% per year. Thus, the 8.2% projected increase for this year is actually more conservative than the 4-year annual average. Yet, the spokesman claims the forecast is overstated.